I've recently fallen in love with the tiny love stories from the New York Times. Does anyone else follow those? I'm seeing a few nods. In 100 words or less, people write their tiny love story, often accompanied with a picture of the author or an image that represents something from their story. Like this one, from a mother sharing about her family. She writes, my husband and I were 30 with 3 children under the age of 6 when we adopted a 16-year-old from foster care. Days were spent trying to be cool and strict and look like we knew what we were doing. Sleepless nights were spent recounting the day's failures. But every morning we got up and we did it again. Made mistakes, laughed, cried, argued, apologized, prayed, reminded Brandon to wear his retainer, cheered for him at football games, cut his hair in the garage, and somewhere in the mundane, I became Brandon's mother, and Brandon became my son. And at the bottom of this tiny love story is a picture of a smiling teenager in a bright blue shirt. Snuggled around him are 3 small children, and one is sitting on his lap, and they look like a family. Or this tiny love story from a daughter remembering her mother. In my 40s, I spent summers with my widowed mother in England. Before returning to New York, I would write playful notes and hide them around her house. Under the silver candlestick, she discovered this note. The butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker, and your daughter all love you. For weeks after I left, she would call and laugh. I found another one of your little notes. Then, cleaning out her house after she died, I found a box in her bedroom. Inside was every note I'd ever given to her, organized by year, a gift she gave back to me. And at the picture at the bottom of this tiny love story, is a collection of plastic bags with these little tiny handwritten notes with X's and O's, each labeled Jen Notes, Summer of 92, Jen Notes, 1998, Jen Notes, 2002. Or this tiny love story from a grandchild sharing about his grandmother, Nanima. Unlike the other trees Nanima planted at our home in Pakistan, I dislike this mango tree. Mango trees mean mango bugs. 3 years ago, one of the mango tree's branches touched my bedroom balcony, allowing bugs to infest my space. Those bugs, they petrify me, I said to my Nanima. Although I was an adult, I was always her baby. The next morning, she cut her beloved tree's branch. Only a grandmother can love like that. And this is my first spring without her. The tree will blossom, the bugs will come, but I won't have my Nanima to hear and appease my fears. And at the bottom of this tiny love story is a picture of Nanima by a lychee tree she planted. She's smiling at the tree, her fingers holding a fruit. There's something delightful about these tiny love stories. They're honest and real, slices of life. It's like we peek into someone's innermost world and get a chance to read a page from the book of their heart. And these stories so often are conversations. They spark an internal conversation between the one sharing and the one receiving. As one writer put it, we argue with stories, internally or out loud. We talk back, we praise, we denounce. Every story is the beginning of a conversation with ourselves as well as with others. Stories prompt us to ask questions, to reflect on our own experience, to reevaluate our lives. Stories motivate us to ponder the world and our place in it. So with these tiny love stories, Did the story about the family adopting a foster child spark a memory? Or the notes to a beloved parent who saved each and every one of them? Or the grandmother who lovingly trimmed a branch to keep the bugs away? Did watching Morgane and Sarah float through the waves and the sun and the grass bring a smile to your heart? Maybe longing to find that happy and carefree place for yourself. Each one of these paints a picture, serves as an invitation, much like this service today, a place of reflection and inspiration, a warm hope of who and how and what we can be. Writer Elizabeth Soba offers us this. When a story is at its best, its effect is expansive rather than nakedly persuasive. Narratives tell us point blank who we should be, how we should behave, and they're better described as dictates or propaganda. The most enduring stories, by contrast, broaden our mental and moral outlook without demanding that we hew to a certain standard. We say that as Unitarian Universalists, revelation is not sealed for us, meaning that our living tradition continues to change and shift with the wisdom of the day, the voices clamoring for justice, the wisdom that we each bring from our life experience as we build towards collective liberation. We say that revelation is not sealed because we are human, with finite understandings, and yet capable of bold prophetic imagination. We say revelation is not sealed because our shared principle of the ongoing search for truth and meaning pulls at the edges of our hearts and asks, invites us, nudges us, pushes us to make room for more of life, more people, more compassion, more joy, more justice, more hope. The ongoing search for truth and meaning is like a tap, 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 tap on our hearts, asking us, can we love more? Can we forgive more? Can we ask for forgiveness more and more often? Can we say no when we need to? Can we embrace empathy and move boldly towards justice? That tap, 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 asking us, are we doing what we need to be doing to be who we need to be? Asking us, are we saying yes to life? And I have to share, all of these questions have been very loud in my thoughts and my dreams this week, as a few things have been happening simultaneously. The cicadas are pouring out of the grounds. Welcome to Rockville. Welcome to the East Coast. And the CDC updated the guidance on mask wearing indoors and outdoors for fully vaccinated people. Just a big old ugh to both, right? Bursts of quasi-chaos everywhere as we're trying to make good choices for ourselves, for our families, for our communities. Just ugh. I was taken aback when I went to the gym yesterday, and about half of the folks were unmasked. Half. It took a moment for me to adjust to the sight. After all this time, unmasked faces moving about this indoor space felt really jarring. And even though I'm fully vaccinated, I'm not there yet. I'm not ready yet. My father is nearing 90. My children aren't vaccinated yet. And often I'm around people whose health is fragile and they're vulnerable. So that's my choice for now. And everyone will continue to make these choices for themselves and their families, and we'll keep talking. We'll keep talking to make sure we can move together as we navigate this transition and so many transitions. Similarly, I had to pause when Colleen Dolak posted a video of a sidewalk and a tree filled, and I mean filled, with piles of cicadas. Did anyone else see that video on social media? Filled! Piles and piles of them, from on the ground to all the way up the trunk to the branches and hanging off the leaves. Cicadas everywhere. Kind of gross, kind of mesmerizing, and kind of cool. In Chinese iconography, cicadas are actually revered as symbols of rebirth and immortality. In the Han Dynasty, jade amulets shaped like cicadas were placed on the tongues of corpses to symbolize a hope for new life. Imperial designs often included cicadas because they represented purity and wisdom. Purity because they feed on only dew and tree sap, and they perch on high branches and watch with those big eyes the world around them. In antiquity, the headgear of rulers and nobles incorporated a golden image of a cicada with prominent eyes. The emblem signified refinement, modesty, and a full awareness of one's surroundings. So learning a little bit more about the humble cicada's meaning for cultures around the world kind of shifted something for me. Okay, they're a little startling, but I think this moment, this re-emerging, also speaks to this place that we find ourselves in now. These emergings in small ways, not after 17 years like the cicada, but after over a year of sheltering in place, a virtual school for our children, for virtual work and programming for so many, for endless Zooms. One of my colleagues re-sang "My Life Flows On" in endless song to "My Life Flows On" in endless Zoom to capture that moment. Endless physical distancing. And now this coming out into the world for some, making plans, dreaming together of what being out there in the world, being together could mean and be. And it reminded me of a t-shirt that Reverend Linda wore last spring. And it wrote something along the lines of "Everyone has a story to tell. Breathe. Everyone has a story to tell." When we fully emerge from this time, like those cicadas pushing out of their shells, everyone will have a story to tell. Each and every one of us will have a story of what it meant to lose so much. Stories of connection and loss. Stories of new habits, new creativity. Stories of new comforts. Stories of clarity. Stories of heartbreaking grief. Stories of gratitude for the people that made this time bearable, for the people that touched our hearts. And for me, in thinking about story, it's reminded me of my deployment to Afghanistan 18 years ago. We had something called the donut of misery. It was just a simple pie chart, but it counted down the months, weeks, days, hours, and seconds until our deployment was over. In some ways, that was a gift, even though it was called the donut of misery, because there was an end date, loosely, that always changed, you never know. But for 18 months, that 18-month experience, for me, was filled with both grief and meaning, friendships and service. It was new experiences, driving a Humvee across the desert, up and down mountains. It was hard times for many. There was lots of loss, lots of tears and lots of laughter. The experience forever changed me and the trajectory of my life, and I am forever thankful. Actually, a story just popped into my mind. I'm going to share this one. So one of the things that I did when I was in Afghanistan is I taught karate to, I ran a dojo for anyone who would like to take a lesson here or there. And after a year and a half, I had a few of my students who actually got to about brown belt, which was really amazing. And part of our testing is that we have fight night. And in order to test, that's part of your test, is everyone spars for an entire night. And I invite other black belts to help me test the students for their next belts. And I was sparring with another black belt, and we were having fun. And by accident, he popped me in the eye, and I had a huge black eye. It was a fair hit, totally fair hit. My face was where his fist was, and I should have ducked, and I didn't duck. So the problem was I was a chaplain. And the next day, I went to the staff call, and the general officer, the commander of the task force, looked around his staff table and saw his junior chaplain, his junior lieutenant chaplain, with a huge black eye, stopped the meeting and said, "Chaplain, what happened?" And it became an infamous story for days and weeks to come. And unfortunately, my friend and fellow black belt never quite lived down the fact that he gave the chaplain a black eye. Thank you for letting me share that story. So as we find ourselves somewhere in between the middle and the next chapter of this global pandemic, I invite you to consider your story. Perhaps even your tiny love story from this time. I invite you to write your story because our living tradition depends upon it. Your story, our stories, nudges us to answer that question. Are we doing what we need to be doing to become who we are called to become? Perhaps it's something from Carla's wisdom story. Wasn't that great? The story may be broken, but it comes together again. The story may have cracks, but it's our story to share. You know, I was going to close with another little tiny love story from Afghanistan, but I felt like I just told you one. So instead, I'd really, really, really like for all of you to indulge me in one of my most favorite activities recently. It's an exercise from Soul Matters. A few of you are already smiling because I've done it a few times. And we did it during worship a few weeks ago, during the breakout session. I'd like everyone to think of how you would respond to the question, I can tell you a story about, that speaks to this time for you. I can tell you a story about what? What is that story? And you're welcome to put it in the chat. I'll give you a moment to ponder, reflect. I can tell you a story about what? Who's going to be bold and give me one? Thank you, Mary. I can tell you a story about teenage boys and a pandemic. Amen. I can tell you a story about playing with the kids during their breaks. Oh, yes. Virtual school and virtual work meant little work, take a break with the kids. A little more work, take another break with the kids. I can tell you a story about Zoom opening up participation in meetings. Amen. Oh, Kurt's saying, I can tell you a story about baking challah. Stephanie shares, I can tell you a story about taking a stand-up comedy class. Amen. I can tell you a story about being shy. Absolutely. Sarah shares, I can tell you a story about living and working through grief and depression that almost broke me. Almost. Marie shares, I can tell you a story about breakfast with the grandkids in Albuquerque. Oh, Rena can tell you a story about birth in the time of COVID. Bless your sacred doula work, Rena. Susan shares, I can tell you a story about the medicinal properties of chocolate. Yep, medicinal properties of chocolate. Amen to that. Myra says, I can tell you about a story about the joys of sweatpants in every color. Amen. Doug can tell us a story about moving across the country in the middle of a pandemic. I'm missing a few of these. Sandhya can tell you a story about love, perseverance, hard work, family, mental illness, survival, distance, blessings, love, and kindness. Amen. Val can tell us a story about breakfast with our bunny. Oh, I remember Bunny's name. Oh, you told me Bunny's name. I'll have to remember that. Lisa can tell us a story about group quilting while socially distanced. Kent can tell us a story about over-the-top backyard gardening. Amen. Amen. Celia and Arthur can tell us a story about patience and persistence with the Canadian government. Absolutely. And Paulette can tell us a story about Zoom with sisters, daughters, and granddaughters. Elizabeth can tell you a story about discovering profound blessings through profound loss. And that may be my sister Elizabeth. Maxie, that's it. Thank you, Val. Maxie is Buddy's name. Thank you. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, beloveds. I think this is the perfect way to close this homily with your stories, our stories, as we continue to build towards that beloved community that we seek. And it's only appropriate that our closing song is one of hope, that we take all of our stories and move forward together with love and compassion. Amen. Blessed be. And may our lives preach so much louder than our lips.